When I was a child, my Sunday mornings would start by coming to the breakfast table and finding coins there on the table. There'd be nickels and dimes and quarters. They would have been left by my dad. He was a pastor, and he would have already headed off to church before I was ever up and ready to come to the table. So I would not find him, but I would find the change that he had put on the table. That change was for me to put into my offering envelope. And so I remember when that amount that I was to pick up was a dime. And I would take my dime, and I had my offering envelope, and I would very deliberately put that money in the envelope and take the envelope to church and give it as my offering to God each week. I have memories of that with great joy. I have a sense that I belonged, that I was a part of the church's ministry, that my dime, while I don't think I had any illusions that the church budget was dependent on my dime, I do think I had a sense that I was a part of all the church was doing because I was putting in my gift and my offering each week. I remember filling out my commitment card when we were doing our stewardship commitment every year, and knowing that I was getting to write down, this is how I will be participating in the ministries of the church. I remember when I moved from a dime to a quarter, and that was a big deal. That was a huge step of an increase in giving, and an increase in continuing to help to shape my heart to find joy in giving, to find joy in giving. Through those very early habits, where the funds were actually being provided by my father, grew habits that I was able to claim even more for myself as I became a babysitter. And as a teenager, was able to begin making a little bit of money and was able to realize that I could set aside a portion of those funds to be given. My first opportunity to tithe off of my personal earnings. And again, having a sense of joy about being able to do that. Something formative was happening for me. Something was happening that was probably making as much of a difference in my own life as it was in the ministries of the church. But my experience was that I was part of something that was far larger than me and far bigger than the amount that I could contribute, the amount that I had to give. My heart was being shaped. I was learning that giving was a source of joy. I remember later the opportunity that came about through a ministry called the Builders Club that was sponsored by the Holston Conference. I was in high school when that started. Initially, it was a gift of $25 a year. $25 a year was what was being asked by members of our congregations across the conference to be used to start new churches or to help new ministries begin in churches to help them revitalize. And I looked at my babysitting money and said, I can do $25 a year. That's the first gift that I remember that was beyond just the local church's ministry, where I got to participate now with a larger body of Christians, the larger church, as we were seeking to make a difference and seeking to work together for God's purposes. And again, I believe my heart was transformed because of that. The money I received from my dad on those Sunday mornings, the money that I made while babysitting, was money that I was learning wasn't just for me to indulge myself or to buy something I wanted or to see what I could get. Instead, I believe those first opportunities that I was given to share helped me learn that money was something that was entrusted to my care to see if I could share with it and become part of something bigger than myself. Something that I could share in with others. Something that could teach me to trust. to trust God with my choices, with my resources, with my life. And in the process, it became a way of teaching me a holy habit that would sustain and would last regardless of life's circumstances. Now, I share those stories of my first experiences of giving, not to boast or to brag, so don't hear them those ways. I share them because I'm thankful for them. I'm thankful for those experiences. I'm thankful that they helped to shape my heart. I also share them as a word of hope, for I hope they represent the kind of spirit that we are developing in our life together as a congregation. I hope they represent how we are helping to teach our children and our youth, and to practice even as adults of all ages and stages in life, our own shaping of our heart through the giving that we are able to do. You see, I hope we find ourselves excited to be able to give, that we find that as something that gives us a sense of joy, a sense of a lift, a sense of anticipation, that we're getting to participate. We are getting to be about something that none of us could do by ourselves, but that God has called us to do together. I hope that we find that giving helps us be excited about how we can be a blessing to another. I hope we get as excited about how we can save to share as we do about how we can save to get. I hope we love sharing in a larger cause, in a mission, and in a ministry that's beyond our individual needs, beyond our individual wants, beyond even the purchase of our favorite toys, which Doug reminded us don't go away just because we grow up. They just change in their nature. The power of holy habits, the power of shaping our hearts, is a critical component to our walk of faith. You see, there are going to be cross points in our lives. There are going to be points where life becomes challenging, where there are changes for us. It might be a financial change. It may be a life experience change. It may be a time of disagreement. It may be a time of discord. All of these have the possibility to lead us away from our holy habits, to tempt us to store up for ourselves. There are times that we even find that we are tempted to use our finances to vote, to express an opinion, to control, to exercise influence. Often we do that by withholding our gifts. And I would ask us to think seriously about that and about those choices. For I believe we must consider who's at the center of the decision when our choice is to hold back, when our choice is to hold on or to vote with our purse. That seems a far cry from a life of generosity that God would desire for us. And it seems that often when we seek to control and withhold, we may well cause harm, may well cause suffering for another, for the sake of us getting to express our opinion. So it's important for our hearts to be shaped, to know that our heart and the shape of our heart is influenced by how we use our treasure. For how we use it certainly leads us to differing outcomes for our source of joy and for our source of gratitude for the gifts that God has shown to each of us. Gifts that may be material in nature, but gifts that begin just with being thankful for the gift of life. the gift of a new day, the gift of mercy, of grace, of forgiveness. You see, we want to be those who cultivate a heart of gratitude. And we want the sharing of our treasure to lead our heart in the ways of God's mercy and the ways of God's generosity towards us as we share with others. So when I think about shaping our heart, I find it important for us to look at the power that our possessions can hold over us and the power that they can have in our relationship to God and to our neighbors. Especially when you hear the parable that we heard this morning about the temptation to just build bigger barns. And then you pair that with the teaching that follows it, a teaching about trust, a teaching about considering the lilies and the ravens, a teaching about storing up treasure towards God. Then we're called to look at our resources very carefully and to look at how we use our treasure very carefully. For if we are looking to our resources solely as something that we must protect, something that's for us alone, something that is used to help us attain what we feel we want or need, then we will build bigger barns. And yet the truth is, life will march on anyway. And someday we will die. And then whose will it be? I believe part of what this parable and teaching invites us to do is to confront the fleeting nature of life. The fleeting nature of life and the fact that we are all mortal, that we are all limited, rich or poor, young or old. Someday our lives will end. It's only when we take that seriously that we begin to see that our resources are a tool, not a source of security. They're a tool for generosity. They're a tool for sharing God's grace. They're a tool for experiencing joy. But they're not the source of our security. Our resources help us meet our basic needs. They help us provide for others. They help us to share in missions and to share in ministries that point beyond us. Whether it's the dime that was on that table long ago, or a larger sum of money, we give as a means of expressing our trust in God. We give to shape our hearts. Our treasures become something then that don't possess us, but that we hold in trust, that we hold on to lightly, that we see as having power to do good, even as at the same time our treasures will help meet our needs. John Wesley, who is our ancestor in faith in the Wesleyan movement, made a decision early in his life about how he would approach stewardship. He determined what it would take for him to live. Once he determined that, then that's what he lived on for the rest of his life. Now he received increases in his income, but that is what he would use to give away to the poor, to give away to other ministries. He gave independent of his income because he gave based on his bounty. He gave as a way of expressing his thanksgiving and trusting that his daily needs would be met. There are stories of many across the years who have lived in that way as well. Stories of those who have lived very simply, those who would not be perceived as persons who had much to give financially, but because they had chosen wisely, were able to give beyond what was expected. I'm reminded of a couple who were part of a church where I had grown up, and they provided a college scholarship for me. Now, if I had looked around that congregation and guessed at who would have been financially able to do so, they would not necessarily have been the couple that I would have spotted. But because they had lived simply, they were able to be a blessing to others. I was only one of many that they helped out of their generosity. You see, there's a critical posture to the choices that we make, the way we live our lives. And it's critical because it's really hard for us to know when we have enough. It's hard for us to be mindful enough to say that our trust is in God and not in our resources. It's important for us to decide ahead of time so that as we continue to have resources entrusted to our care, they don't become what we trust as our security. And we don't see our accumulation of wealth as being solely for our own well-being. But we struggle to know what is enough. There's even a term for it. It's called FOMO, fear of missing out. Fear of missing out. It's a phenomenon that's been developed and identified with the rise of social media. Because in social media, what people show is the greatest and best moment of their life. Now, some people show you what they have for dinner, but many people show you the most exciting thing that they have done in their life. And we begin to think maybe everybody else is living a glamorous life all the time. And so maybe we're missing out. And when we begin to be fearful about that, then our resources begin to control us. We aren't sure we're going to have enough. We're not sure that we might miss something. And so those resources begin to develop a power of their own. So there's been a question that has helped me across the years that I will share with you. It came from that great, significant work called the Reader's Digest. And in it one day, I read a little quote at the bottom of a page that said, "Before you purchase anything, you need to ask yourself, will I have to feed it? Will I have to house it? Will I have to educate it? Will I have to dust it? Will I have to take care of it?" And it said, if you say yes to any of these things, you may want to say no to what you're considering and move on to something else. Well, I have to say I've recalled that from time to time when there was something that would catch my eye. And I would say, am I going to be any happier tomorrow if I have this than I am today? Or would I be figuring out how to feed it, how to keep it up, how to care for it? Would it eventually break? Would it eventually wear out? And most of the times, that answer would be yes. And I could move on, admire it for the moment, but not let it become something that controlled me. You see, we often think we need a little more than we have. Questions have been asked across time to persons, do you have enough? And we often say no. And so the response will be, how much more do you need? And the answer generally is about 20% more. Regardless of income levels, folks sort of figure if they have 20% more, then it would be okay. But those pursuits never end. They never end. So it's critical. It is a critical decision point for us to make choices that see our resources as a tool so that they do not control us. Otherwise, they will determine how we feel. They will determine how anxious we are, how we relate to others, how we relate to God, how we spend our time, as well as the legacy that we leave. You see, life circumstances are going to change. That's a given. And one of the things that I want us to notice in this passage that we heard today is that as it helps us consider a life of generosity, it does not mention once basing those decisions on the circumstances of life. Circumstances will change, but the habits of the heart stay in place. So the question becomes, how shall we live? How shall we care for our relationship to God, our relationship to our neighbors, our meeting of our basic needs? Well, that's where it seems that the training of our heart by the way we use our treasures becomes a holy habit. A holy habit of deciding ahead of time how we will use our resources. And here's the good news. If we decide ahead of time, if we're intentional about the choices that we use with what's been entrusted to our care, then we don't have to decide in the midst of a crisis. We already know. We already know our priorities. We already know our practices. We already know our commitments. We already know the source of our security. So we don't have to decide in crisis. We don't have to decide in the lean years. We don't have to figure it out when we're under stress. We already know. The scripture has told us not 1 hour will be added to our life, no matter how much we try, no matter how much we worry, no matter how much we hoard up solely for ourselves. Not 1 ounce of worry will change a single outcome. But a life of generosity will change our lives, will shape our hearts, and I believe will change the world, 1 dime at a time. Next Sunday is our Commitment Sunday. And I hope this week, as you are preparing yourself to come for worship and to come to be a part of that worship experience, that you will consider choices that will help you move towards joy. We've used as our sermon series this month, the elephant in the room, because sometimes we worry about money as if it is an elephant in the room. I hope you'll look that elephant in the eye and you'll say, there are holy habits that I can develop that help me know how to deal with you, elephant. And you may not be so scary after all. So let me encourage you to have conversations in your home this week. Conversations with your spouse, conversations with your children, with your grandchildren, about the choices you make. And let's help each other participate across generations, our children, our youth, our adults at all stages. The funding of our ministries is critical. For us to be who God would have us to be in this place, the funding of our ministries is critical. But even more important than funding our ministries is shaping our hearts. Shaping our hearts by living a life of generosity, by being rich toward God. Rich toward God. For that's what we're about. Guiding our hearts through the choices we make that will take us in the way of God's peace, of God's love as the source of our security. May it be so, and may we be so generous that we're overwhelmingly surprised and amazed at the work of God in our life. Oh, may it be so.